I don't use highway restrooms anymore. I know that sounds dramatic. My husband thinks it sounds dramatic. But he also wasn't there. So this was 3 summers ago. We were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia. My husband had planned this whole route through places he wanted to see, which meant we were cutting through some genuinely empty stretches of highway. Western Kansas on Route 400 is one of the emptiest roads I have ever been on in my life. Flat farmland in every direction, nothing else, just road and sky. I had been asleep in the passenger seat for a few hours when he pulled into a gas station sometime around 10 at night. He said he needed to fill up and grab snacks. I figured it was a good chance to use a real bathroom, so I got out. I didn't bring my phone. I figured I'd be 5 minutes. That was my first mistake. The bathroom was down a narrow hallway at the back of the store. I pushed open the door and almost walked right into a woman coming out of one of the stalls. She had gray hair that looked sticky somehow. Foam flip-flops, and she was wearing this thick purple and green coat that made no sense at all because it was summer in Kansas and it was 80 degrees outside. She was carrying a tied-up plastic grocery bag. When she saw me, she just stared. Not a normal look, not the quick glance you give someone when you almost bump into them. This was a locked-on stare, like she was waiting for me to do something specific. I gave her a nod and tried to step around her. She didn't move right away. Then, instead of leaving, she turned around and followed me to the sink area. She didn't turn on the water, didn't look in the mirror, just stood there with her arms at her sides staring at me. I went into the nearest stall and locked it. I sat there and listened. After a couple of minutes, I heard her flip-flops slapping toward the door. Then the door opened and slammed shut. I waited a moment. Then I realized I could still hear breathing. Not mine, someone else's, coming from somewhere near the exit. She had opened and slammed the door to make it sound like she left, but she was still in there. I did not move. I sat completely still, and I thought about how I had not brought my phone, and I thought about how my husband was somewhere out in the store with no idea any of this was happening, and I thought about that stupid plastic grocery bag she had been carrying. Eventually, the door opened and closed again. The breathing stopped. Relief. I was about to unlock the stall when I heard a long gasp, like someone who had been holding their breath finally letting it go. Then the door opened and closed a third time. She had faked leaving twice. I stayed in that stall for a long time after that. When I finally came out, the bathroom was empty. I washed my hands so fast I barely got them wet, and I walked back into the store, and I stayed close to a large man who was checking out at the counter, and I used him as cover to get to the door. She was outside, standing off to the side of the entrance, staring at me. She had something in her hand. The way she was holding it and the way she was crouched slightly like she was about to move forward made me think it was a knife. I prepared myself to scream or run. Instead, she turned quickly and walked around the side of the building. I ran to the car. My husband looked at me and said, "What took you so long?" I told him I'd explain when we were on the road. As we pulled out, I looked back. She was standing at the edge of the building watching our car leave. I watched her until she disappeared. I told my husband everything. He was annoyed I hadn't brought my phone. Which was fair. That was fair. But I keep thinking about that plastic bag. And the way she stood at the sink doing nothing. and the breathing I heard after she slammed the door. I don't know what she wanted. I just know I didn't stay long enough to find out, and I'm glad I didn't. I quit that job a few months after this happened. I told my boss it was the hours. That was partly true. The real reason was that I could not stop checking my rearview mirror. Even on roads I had driven 100 times, even in broad daylight, even when there was nothing behind me, I just could not stop checking. This was January 2020. I was 24 and working for a small logistics company doing automotive parts deliveries between cities in the Midwest. Long drives, decent pay, nobody bothering me. Most of the time it was fine. That night I was on I-80 heading east from Des Moines toward Davenport, about 3.5 hours. I had left around 8 in the evening. By 10:30 I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I was getting drowsy in that way where you know it's only going to get worse if you do not do something about it. I saw a sign for a rest area and pulled off. The place was almost empty. Dim streetlights, small brick building, about a dozen parking spaces. One other vehicle, an old white van at the far end of the lot. Lights off, engine off. I parked under a light and went inside, washed my face. Cold water. Stood there for a second looking in the mirror. I thought I heard the door open behind me. I turned around, nobody there. I stood still and listened, just the heater rattling. I told myself it was the wind, and I finished up and went back outside. The white van's headlights were on, engine still off, just the headlights on. I had not heard anything. I got in my truck fast and pulled out of the lot. About 5 minutes down the highway I saw headlights behind me. Small at first, then getting closer fast. It was the van. It came right up behind me, inches from my bumper. I was already doing 75 and it was right there. Then it moved alongside me and matched my speed, and the driver rolled his window halfway down. I could barely see him, just a shadow and a baseball cap. He was pointing at my truck bed and motioning for me to pull over. I looked at my truck bed. It was empty. There was nothing in it. He wasn't warning me about anything. I kept driving and pretended not to notice him. He started honking, drifting toward my lane. I held my line. Then he shot forward and cut in front of me, and for a second I thought he was going to brake. Instead, he pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. I flew past him, heart going so fast I could feel it in my throat. I watched my mirror. He was back on the road 30 seconds later. He followed me for another 20 miles. Sometimes he fell back far enough that I thought he was gone. Then he would appear right behind me again. I spotted a truck stop sign and took the exit. Pulled in under the brightest light I could find near the diesel pumps. There were other drivers around. A diner attached to the lot with people inside. The van didn't follow me in right away. I waited 2 minutes. Then it came slowly up the ramp and into the lot. Just idled there at the far end, facing my truck. I went into the diner. The woman behind the counter looked at me, and I must have looked like what I felt like because she immediately called over a trucker sitting at the counter. Big guy, flannel shirt, gray beard. He walked outside with me. We both looked at the van sitting at the far end of the lot. He said, "Yeah, that ain't good." He told me to go back inside and walked straight toward it. I don't know what he said. But a few seconds later, the van reversed hard, swung around, and left the lot fast. The trucker came back, shaking his head. He said there were 2 guys in there, hoodies, staring straight ahead. not saying a word. I stayed in that diner for almost an hour. When I got to Davenport, I checked my truck. Everything looked fine. But there were 2 smudged handprints on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it with dirty hands. I stood there looking at those smudges for a long time. I still think about the empty truck bed. He knew there was nothing in it. He was never warning me about anything. I know that now. I knew it then too. I just didn't want to think about what he actually wanted me to pull over for. I still don't. I want to be clear that I'm fine. Nothing actually happened to me that night. My car got dinged up. I was scared out of my mind. But I'm fine. I think about that a lot. The fact that I'm fine. Because I easily could not have been. There's a quick check about 25 minutes from my house. It's the only thing open 24 hours in the area where I live. My sleep schedule is a mess, so I've been there more times than I can count. That night I was coding, deep in it. The kind of focus that doesn't come easy and you don't want to break. Around 2 in the morning I went from comfortable to starving in about 4 minutes, which is just how it works at 2 in the morning. I drove to the quick check. The ride there was fine, completely normal. I went in, ordered a sandwich, and walked the aisles while I waited. That's when I noticed him. At the end of one of the aisles, a man was sitting on the floor, crisscross, facing the refrigerator, not looking at anything in the fridge, just sitting there facing it. I walked down a few aisles to try and get a look at his face. The moment I turned the corner, he whipped around and stared directly at me. Fast, like he had known I was coming. His eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide. His lip was trembling. His posture was twisted, like he was straining at something that wasn't there. He stared at me with this blank, dead look that I could not stop thinking about later. Not angry, not confused, just completely flat. We looked at each other for too long. Then I looked away and went to the counter to wait for my sandwich. I positioned myself so I could see the corner of the store where he had been. He never came out of the aisle. My sandwich was ready. I left. I was halfway onto the highway when I saw something in my peripheral vision. A person running, full speed, from the store entrance to the far end of the parking lot. Brown coat, same guy. He jumped into a truck. I was already on the highway. I watched him in my mirror as I drove away. A few minutes later, headlights appeared behind me, getting closer fast. I thought cop. I slowed down a little. The car got close enough that I could see it clearly. It was his truck, the same one from the lot. He started flashing his lights and honking. I hit the gas. He stayed right behind me. I was in a sedan and he was in a pickup, but I figured I could still outrun him, and I tried. By the time I got to 100, the voice in my head was telling me I was going to die if I kept going. I swerved right to try and get him to pass. He swerved with me. I slowed down to pull over. The truck rammed into me. I grabbed the wheel, held it. I could feel the impact in my whole body. I knew he was going to do it again. The moment I saw him move, I swerved left and hit the brakes hard. He shot past me. I watched his truck swerve back and forth and then spin out and go off the highway into a field. I drove the rest of the way home with hands I couldn't get to stop shaking. When I got inside, I called the police. They took my statement. The quick check had cameras in the lot. I told them that. That was just over a week ago. I haven't heard anything yet. I don't know who he was. I don't know why he came after me. I don't know what he would have done if I had pulled over when he rammed me. I think about that last one the most. Story 4. Route 82. I never reported any of it. Not to the police. Not to my company. I know how that sounds. I've thought about it a lot. But legally speaking, there were some things about that night I did not want to explain, and I'm going to leave it at that. What I will say is that being armed that night probably saved my life, and I stand by every decision I made. This was summer of 2022. I was 25 and working for a last-mile delivery startup hauling refurbished electronics and custom PC parts to rural parts of the Southwest. Long routes, erratic schedules, areas most delivery companies wouldn't touch. I didn't mind the long drives. Grew up in a road-tripping family. That night I was on Route 82 in southern New Mexico, past the outskirts of Lincoln National Forest, around 1 in the morning. If you have never driven that stretch at night, it is hard to explain how isolated it feels. Narrow road, almost no lighting, a car every 20 or 30 minutes if you're lucky. And it's the only route through that area for miles. The GPS alternatives add 2 hours. So if you needed to get through that part of New Mexico, that was your road. I was listening to a true crime podcast when I came around a bend and saw a red hatchback on the shoulder with its hazards on. A woman was standing next to it holding her phone in the air trying to find a signal. My first instinct was to keep driving. I'm not naive about what can happen on empty roads at 1 in the morning. But then I thought about my girlfriend, my sister, whether I would want someone to stop for them. I also had a Glock 43 holstered under my steering column. I slowed down and cracked the passenger window a couple of inches. She rushed over immediately and tried the door handle. It was locked. She said her car had died and she couldn't reach anyone. She needed a ride to the nearest gas station. Her voice had this jittery quality, like she was stressed or maybe on something. I sat there for a second. Then I unlocked the door. She got in fast, barely looked at me, said thank you in this slurred way that made me think she was drunk. I asked her what had happened to the car. Did she hit something or did it just cut out? She kept deflecting, telling me to just drive, not answering anything directly. The more she talked, the less anything she said made sense. I was close to telling her to get out when I looked back at her car one more time. A man stepped out from behind it. He had been hiding there, crouched behind the car the whole time. I looked forward. There was a second figure standing in the road about 50 feet ahead of us, holding something long, a bat or a pipe, moving toward my car. I floored it. No hesitation, no thought, just floored it. The woman spun around and immediately started yelling. Then she reached into her purse. I knew what she was reaching for. I drew my gun and rested it on the steering wheel where she could see it. I told her not to move. She stopped. She stopped talking too, just stared straight ahead. We drove like that for about 30 minutes until I saw a gas station with other vehicles in the lot. 2 big rigs parked outside. I pulled in. I reached across her, opened the passenger door, and told her to get out. She refused, said something I couldn't make sense of. I pushed the door wider and she got out, stumbled back onto the pavement, started yelling. One of the truckers started jogging over. I didn't wait. I pulled out before he reached me. I stopped at another gas station a few miles up the road to fill up. I walked around to check the passenger seat. Wedged between the cushions was a burner phone battery and a sealed pack of zip ties. I threw both in the trash. Got back in and kept driving. I thought about the man behind the car, the figure in the road. the woman's hand going into her purse. I thought about what the zip ties were for. I have made myself stop thinking about that last part. Some things you are better off not following all the way to the end. My name is Mark Stevens. For 30 years I've made my living on the road, a ghost in a 40-ton machine haunting the highways of America while the rest of the world sleeps. I've seen it all. Blizzards in the Rockies that'll bury a rig in minutes, flash floods in Texas that turn highways into churning brown rivers, and desert heat in Arizona that can cook a man in his own cab. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, and what I can fix with a wrench and a bit of cussing. I believe in worn-out tires, bad coffee, and the undeniable logic of a diesel engine. I don't believe in ghosts. At least I didn't. Not until that night in October, the night my route took me through a forgotten stretch of road in rural Missouri, and I heard a dead man scream. The night started like any other. I was behind schedule, pushing my Peterbilt 379 through the rolling, shadow-drenched hills, trying to make up for time lost to a stubborn Doughty inspector at a way station back in Joplin. The air was crisp and clean, the kind of deep autumn night that feels sharp in your lungs and makes the stars look like chips of ice. The moon was a pale, crooked sliver, offering little light, and the world outside my windshield was a vast sea of inky blackness, broken only by the twin beams of my headlights cutting a lonely path through the dark. It's a solitary job, this life, but I've always found a strange comfort in that solitude. It's just you, the road, and the steady, reassuring rumble of the Cummins engine, a mechanical heartbeat in the void. To break the crushing monotony, I had my CB radio on, scanning the channels. It's an old habit, a throwback to a different era of trucking. Most guys use their phones now, streaming podcasts or talking to family, but there's a certain nostalgia to the crackle and hiss of the CB, a tangible connection to the old-timers who paved the way, 1 mile at a time. It's a brotherhood of the airwaves. Around 2 a.m., my scanning landed on Channel 19, and I picked up a conversation. A friendly, gravelly voice was in the middle of telling a joke I'd heard 100 times, something about a talking dog. I let him finish, then keyed the mic, a rare smile touching my lips. "That one's older than the dirt on my boots, driver," I said, my voice a low rumble. The voice came back instantly warm and amused. "Ain't that the truth? But a good story's a good story no matter how many times you tell it. The name's Ben. Folks call me Old Ben." We fell into an easy rhythm, the effortless camaraderie of two strangers sharing the same lonely profession. We talked about our rigs. His was a classic Freightliner, he said, one he'd rebuilt himself. We complained about the rising price of fuel, the terrible burnt coffee at the last truck stop, and the four-wheelers who drive like the road belongs only to them. He had a soothing presence, a calm, grandfatherly tone that made you feel like you'd known him for years. He told me he was hauling a load of fresh-cut lumber up to Des Moines. I was heading east with a belly full of heavy machine parts for a factory in Illinois. For the better part of an hour, his voice was a welcome companion in the dark, a lighthouse signal in the vast, empty ocean of the night. His presence was a shield against the oppressive loneliness of the highway. A reminder that I wasn't entirely alone out there. As I sipped the last of my lukewarm coffee, I glanced down at my paper map, a folded and worn relic I trusted more than any GPS. I saw I was coming up on a shortcut I'd taken a few times in the daylight, a county road that cut straight through a large hill via a short tunnel. It would shave a good 30, maybe 40 minutes off my trip. I mentioned it to Ben more as a passing thought than anything. His response was immediate, and the easy warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a sudden sharp edge of genuine concern. "You're not talking about the Blackwater Creek Tunnel, are you, son?" The way he said the name, drawing it out, gave me a slight pause. "That's the one," I confirmed, trying to sound casual. Looks like a straight shot. Saves me from that long, winding stretch on the main route. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end, filled only with the sound of crackling static that suddenly sounded less like interference and more like a fire dying out. When he spoke again, his voice was low, urgent, almost a whisper. "Mark, you listen to me now. You turn that rig around, find another way. You don't want to go through that tunnel, not at night." I chuckled, a little uneasily this time. The shift in his tone was jarring. "What's the matter, Ben? Afraid of the dark? Heard some spooky stories?" "This ain't a joke," he snapped, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It was more than just concern. It sounded like fear. A deep, primal, gut-wrenching fear. "That place, it ain't right. It's a hungry place. It takes things. People go in and they don't always come out. Just stay on the main highway, please. It's not worth the 30 minutes you'll save." His plea was so earnest, so filled with raw, unexplainable panic that it gave me a serious moment's pause. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, but I was already on the off-ramp, the big sign for the county road flashing past my window. I was tired. I was behind schedule. And the pragmatic part of my brain, the part that had kept me safe and sane for 30 years, was screaming that this was just some local superstition, a ghost story cooked up by bored drivers to scare the rookies. Every state had a haunted road, a phantom hitchhiker, a crybaby bridge. It was all part of the mythology of the highway. "I appreciate the warning, Ben, I really do, but I'll take my chances," I said, trying to inject a confidence I no longer fully felt into my voice. "It's just a tunnel. I'll holler when I'm on the other side." "Don't!" The word was a strangled cry over the radio, distorted by a fresh wave of static. "Don't go in there. It's not a woman like they say. It's not a ghost. It's something else. It's—" His voice dissolved into a violent, screeching burst of static, cutting him off mid-sentence. I tapped the side of my radio, assuming I was just losing his signal as I got closer to the massive hill. The entrance to the Blackwater Creek Tunnel loomed before me, a perfect black arch carved into the face of the rock. In the darkness, it didn't look like an engineering marvel. It looked like a mouth, open and waiting, ready to swallow my rig whole. A shiver I couldn't explain, cold and sharp, traced its way down my spine, but I shook it off with a grunt. "It's just a tunnel," I told myself again, my voice sounding hollow in the cab. "Concrete and rock, nothing more." The moment my cab crossed the threshold, the world changed. The familiar, comforting rumble of my engine seemed to deepen, to become something more guttural and menacing. The air grew heavy and cold, the kind of damp, subterranean chill that seeps right into your bones and makes your teeth ache. And my CB radio, which had been crackling with static, went completely, utterly silent. It wasn't the silence of a lost signal. It was a dead silence, profound and absolute, as if the very concept of sound had been erased from existence within these walls. The silence was a presence in itself, a heavy blanket that smothered everything. The tunnel was supposed to be short, maybe a quarter mile at most. A 30-second drive, tops. But I drove, and the exit never appeared. The concrete walls, slick with moisture that glistened like black oil in my headlights, seemed to press in on me. The yellow sodium lights overhead, spaced too far apart, flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I saw shapes in my peripheral vision, dark, fleeting movements that vanished whenever I tried to look at them directly. I felt a rising tide of claustrophobic panic clawing at my throat. This wasn't right. The tunnel was stretching, elongating itself, trapping me in its gullet. It was a physical sensation, like being in a nightmare where you run and run but never get any closer to your destination. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator, my knuckles bone white on the steering wheel. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, desperately searching, praying to see the pinprick of light that would mean freedom. That's when the radio crackled back to life. It wasn't static this time, it was a voice. Ben's voice, but it was horribly distorted, strained, and thin, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a deep, dark well. His words punctuated by ragged, desperate gasps of terror. "Mark, oh God, Mark, I told you not to come in here," he wailed. The voice wasn't just coming from the speaker. It was coming from all around me, from the walls, from the dashboard, from inside my own head. It was an invasive, violating sound. Ben, where are you? What's happening?" I yelled, my own voice trembling so badly I could barely form the words. "He's in here with me," he screamed, his voice breaking with a sheer, unadulterated horror that I have never heard before or since. It was the sound of a man who has seen the face of his own damnation. "It's not a woman. It's not a ghost. It's the tunnel itself. It's alive. It's digesting me." And then came the scream. It wasn't human. No human throat could produce a sound like that. It was a sound of pure primal agony, of a soul being shredded and torn apart, layered with a wet, tearing, crunching noise that made my stomach heave and my mind recoil. It blasted through the cab, so loud and piercing that the windows vibrated in their frames. It went on, an eternal symphony of torment that drilled itself into the very fiber of my being. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was cut off by a final, sickening liquid crunch. Silence returned. A silence that was now pregnant with the echo of that scream. A silence even more terrifying than the sound it had replaced. I don't remember making a conscious decision to floor it. My body acted on its own, a raw instinct for survival overriding every rational thought. My foot slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Peterbilt roared in protest, and I flew through the remaining darkness, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I burst out of the tunnel and back into the cool night air, gasping as if I had been held underwater for an hour. The sudden return of the stars and the chirping of crickets was so jarring it felt like being born into a new world. I pulled the rig over onto the shoulder, the tires screeching on the asphalt, my body shaking uncontrollably. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to convince myself that I was alive, that I was out. I fumbled for the CB mic, my hands slick with cold sweat. Ben, are you there? Come in, Ben." Only static answered. A normal, comforting static this time, but it was empty. I tried every channel, calling his name over and over, my voice growing hoarse with desperation and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. Nothing. He was gone. A week later, back at my company's main depot in St. Louis, I couldn't shake the incident. I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scream. I saw those endlessly stretching walls. I felt that suffocating silence. I started asking around, talking to older drivers, dispatchers, anyone who might have known a trucker named Old Ben. I described his voice, his rig, the route he said he was on. Most just shook their heads. Finally, a dispatcher named Earl, a man who'd been with the company for 40 years and had records going back to the Stone Age, took pity on me. He pulled up some old dusty digital files on his ancient computer. He found him. Ben Carter, a veteran driver just like he'd said. He'd driven a freight liner, just like he'd said. And he had vanished without a trace 10 years ago. His rig was found abandoned, engine cold, near the eastern entrance to the Blackwater Creek Tunnel. His last known communication was a frantic, garbled transmission picked up by another driver miles away. A message about something being inside the tunnel with him. I don't drive through Missouri at night anymore. I take the long way around no matter how far behind schedule I am. I'll add hours, even a full day to my trip to avoid that part of the state after sundown. Because sometimes when the air is still and the road is empty, I turn on my CB and scan the channels. And deep within the static, on the very edge of hearing, I can almost make out a voice. A terrified, gravelly voice forever trapped in that concrete tomb, warning anyone who will listen. Don't go in there, it takes things. My name is Carla Jensen. I haven't been driving as long as the old-timers with their million-mile jackets and their endless embellished stories, but I'm not new to the road either. I've put in my hours, I know my rig, a Freightliner Cascadia I call Cassie. From the kingpin to the mud flaps, and most importantly, I know the rules. And rule number one, the one they drill into you from day one of training until it becomes a part of your DNA, is you never, ever pick up hitchhikers. It's not just a line item in the company policy handbook. It's common sense in a world that seems to have forgotten what that is. You don't know who they are, what they're running from, or what they're capable of. In the isolated bubble of a truck cab, you are vulnerable. You are a target. I'm a skeptic by nature. It's a trait that serves me well in this line of work. I believe in tangible things: tire pressure, fuel levels, logbook hours, and the irrefutable physics of a 40-ton vehicle. I've heard all the ghost stories at the truck stops, the tales of phantom headlights that chase you for miles before vanishing, of spectral figures on the highway shoulder that disappear when you look in the mirror. I always figured it was just exhaustion and caffeine playing tricks on the mind, the highway hypnosis that can make a sane person see impossible things after 10 hours of staring at an unbroken white line. A story is just a story, a collection of words to pass the time, until you live one, and then it becomes a part of you, a scar on your memory that never fully fades, a constant, chilling reminder that the world is much stranger and more terrifying than you ever wanted to believe. It was a miserable night in late November, the kind of night that makes you seriously question your life choices. A thick, soupy fog had rolled in off the Missouri River, blanketing the interstate and cutting visibility down to almost nothing. It was a disorienting, pearly gray world where your headlights only reached about 20 feet before being swallowed whole by the oppressive mist. The kind of fog that muffles sound and makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth, piloting a spaceship through an empty, silent galaxy. I was crawling along at 20 miles an hour, my knuckles white on the wheel, my entire body tense as I strained to see the road ahead. The rhythmic thump swish of my wipers was the only sound, a hypnotic beat in the profound quiet. Then up ahead, a new color entered my monochrome world. The strobing, frantic pulse of red and blue lights bleeding through the fog. An accident. A bad one, by the looks of it, had the entire highway completely blocked. A wall of flashing emergency vehicles stood sentinel in the mist. My GPS, bless its digital heart, immediately chimed with the solution, its calm, synthesized female voice a stark, almost comical contrast to my rising frustration. It offered a detour, a series of winding county roads that would bypass the jam and hook back up with the interstate in about 20 miles. The route included a tunnel, the Blackwater Creek Tunnel. I'd heard the whispers about it, of course. Every driver who runs that corridor has. It's a landmark of trucker folklore, as much a part of the road as any way station or rest stop. They talk about a woman in a white dress, a jilted bride from the 1920s who, after being left at the altar in a nearby town, threw herself from the cliffs above the tunnel entrance in a fit of despair. A classic, tragic local legend, the kind you find in every corner of the country. I rolled my eyes at the thought, a familiar wave of cynical dismissal washing over me. But I took the detour anyway. A ghost story, no matter how creepy, was infinitely less of a hassle than waiting for hours on a blocked highway with my engine idling and my delivery time slipping further and further away. The county road was even foggier and more desolate than the interstate. The trees on either side were skeletal, their bare, black branches reaching out like gnarled fingers through the mist. dripping with condensation that pattered on my roof like a nervous tapping. It was unnervingly quiet, the fog dampening every sound until all I could hear was the low hum of my engine and that relentless swish of the wipers. The road was narrow, unlit and slick, with wet leaves. As I rounded a sharp, blind bend, my headlights cut through the gloom and landed on a figure standing by the side of the road, positioned just before the dark, waiting arch of the tunnel entrance. It was a woman. She was wearing a thin, simple white dress, the style of which looked like it belonged in another era entirely. It was sleeveless with a delicate lace collar, a dress that would have been beautiful once. Now it was tattered and stained with mud at the hem, looking as if she'd been walking through the damp woods for days. Her hair was long and dark, plastered to her face and neck by the damp, cold air, hanging in limp, sorrowful strands. She had her thumb out, the universal sign for a ride, her other arm wrapped tightly around herself as if for warmth, though she didn't seem to be shivering. She was perfectly still, a pale statue in the swirling fog. My heart gave a painful little jolt, a sudden sharp pang of adrenaline and fear. It was one thing to hear the stories in a brightly lit, noisy diner over a plate of greasy eggs. It was another thing entirely to see them brought to life right in front of you on a foggy, isolated road in the middle of the night. The perfect, chilling tableau. But my rational mind, the part of me that calculates fuel consumption and braking distances, fought to take over. It was probably a local whose car had broken down further up the road. A teenager playing a cruel prank on passing truckers. There had to be a logical explanation. Still, rule number 1, I kept my doors locked and my speed steady. As I passed her, I couldn't help but look. Her face was unnaturally pale, almost luminous in the fog, a stark white against the black of her hair and the gray of the night. And her eyes were fixed on my truck with a desperate, pleading intensity that went far beyond just needing a ride out of the cold. It was a look of profound, soul-deep sorrow and a terrifying, bottomless need that made my skin crawl and the hair on my arms stand on end. It was a hunger. I snapped my gaze forward, my grip tightening on the wheel until my knuckles ached, and drove on, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tunnel entrance loomed, a gaping black maw in the fog, seeming to inhale the mist around it. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and plunged in. The oppressive silence of the fog was instantly replaced by the roar of my engine, amplified and distorted by the curved walls, a deafening, chaotic echo that surrounded me. The sound was disorienting, and for a moment I felt a wave of vertigo. I immediately glanced at my passenger side mirror, the convex glass giving me a wide, distorted view of the spot where she'd been standing. The road behind me was empty, the spot was vacant, a wave of relief so powerful it made me feel lightheaded washed over me. Just a weirdo on a foggy night, nothing more. My mind, primed by the local legend, had filled in the blanks with the spooky details. That's all it was. My imagination getting the better of me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and felt the tension in my shoulders ease just a little. I focused on the road ahead, navigating the gentle curve of the tunnel. It was dark, the widely spaced, flickering lights doing little to pierce the oppressive gloom, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed on the walls. I was about halfway through when a flicker of movement in my main rearview mirror, the one centered above the dash, caught my eye. A subtle shift in the shadows on the bunk behind me. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. She was there. She was sitting on the bunk in the sleeper cab, directly behind my seat, as if she had been there all along, waiting patiently. Time seemed to stop. The roar of the engine faded to a distant hum. My breath hitched in my throat and a scream died before it could form, strangled by sheer, paralyzing disbelief. It was the same woman, the same tattered mud-stained white dress, the same long stringy dark hair that now seemed to drip water onto the fabric of the bunk. But her face, oh God, her face. It was no longer just pale, it was the waxy, translucent, bluish-white color of bone stretched tight over her skull in a way that seemed inhuman. Her lips, which had been a normal color just moments before, were now a deep, bruised blue and were parted in a silent, agonizing scream that contorted her features into a mask of eternal, unending torment. And her eyes, they weren't eyes anymore. They were dark, empty sockets. Bottomless pits of shadow that seemed to pull all the light and warmth and hope out of the cab. They were voids, and those empty sockets were staring right at me in the mirror. Not at the back of my head, but at my reflection, at my own terrified eyes. A direct, chilling connection. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, pinned in my seat by a terror so absolute and profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. My mind was screaming, a frantic, looping mantra of, "This isn't real, this isn't real, this is a waking nightmare, a hallucination." But my eyes told me otherwise. She didn't move a muscle. She just sat there, a frozen tableau of horror reflected in the small, vibrating rectangle of glass. Her silent scream echoing in the cavern of my mind louder than any sound I had ever heard. I could feel the cold radiating from her, a damp, grave-like chill that had nothing to do with the November night. It was a cold that felt ancient and full of sorrow, and it sank deep into my bones. I don't know how I kept the truck on the road. Some primal reptilian part of my brain must have taken over. The part that knows only survival. The part that functions even when the conscious mind has shattered. My hands, though numb and trembling, somehow kept the wheel steady. My foot, though feeling disconnected from my body, somehow kept its pressure on the accelerator. I saw the end of the tunnel approaching, a square of gray, foggy light that promised escape, salvation, a return to the real world. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. The moment my front wheels hit the open air, the moment I was free from the tunnel's embrace, it was like a spell had been broken. The crushing weight on my chest lifted. The cold began to recede. I slammed on the brakes with all my might. The rig protested. The air brakes hissing and screeching, the trailer jackknifing with a deafening groan of tortured metal as it slid on the wet pavement. Before the truck had even come to a complete shuddering stop, I threw my door open and scrambled out, half falling, half jumping to the wet asphalt below. I landed hard on my hands and knees, the sharp gravel digging into my palms, but I barely felt it. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, gasping for air, my body racked with violent, uncontrollable tremors that shook me from head to toe. Finally, after the shaking subsided to a mere tremble, I forced myself to look back. I got to my feet, my legs as weak and unsteady as a newborn foal's, and with my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I peered into the cab. It was empty. The bunk was clear. The air was still. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all. But the cold, the unnatural, soul-deep cold remained, a lingering presence in the small space. And there was a smell, a faint, cloying, sweetish scent of damp earth, of decay, and of wilted flowers, like a forgotten funeral bouquet. And on the bunk, where she had been sitting, was a small, dark, damp patch, slowly soaking into the mattress. I never told the company what happened. Who would believe me? They'd have sent me for a psych evaluation, pulled me off the road, labeled me as unstable. My career would have been over, so I kept it to myself, a dark, festering secret, but the experience left its mark, a deep and jagged wound on my psyche. For weeks afterward, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep without the lights on in my cab. I jumped at every shadow, every flicker of light. I found myself obsessively checking my mirrors, my heart leaping into my throat at the slightest movement in the sleeper cab. And the mirrors. I couldn't stand to look at them for more than a split second, because every now and then, when I was tired, when my guard was down, when I was staring into my own reflection while brushing my teeth at a truck stop, I'd catch a glimpse of something over my shoulder. A pale face, long dark hair, and a silent scream, standing right behind me before vanishing when I blinked, leaving me staring at my own wide, terrified eyes. They say she's still out there, waiting by that tunnel for a ride, forever trapped in the moment of her greatest despair. I believe it, because I gave her one. And I have a terrible, chilling feeling that a part of her never got out of my truck. Some passengers, you see, never leave. They just find a new place to haunt. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone on a dark road, I can still smell the faint scent of damp earth and wilted flowers. And I know, with a certainty that freezes my soul, that I am not alone. My name is Henry Dalton. I turned 65 last year, a milestone that felt less like a celebration and more like the final lap bell at a long, grueling race. I've spent 45 of those years behind the wheel of a big rig, a rolling titan of chrome and steel, crisscrossing this country more times than I can possibly count. I've watched the seasons change through a pane of glass, seen cities rise and small towns fade, all from the captain's chair of my Kenworth. I've got a wife, Martha, whose patience is the stuff of sainthood. I've got grandkids who are growing up too fast, their faces changing every time I see them between runs. And I've got a little house with a porch swing that's been waiting for me, a quiet promise of still mornings and peaceful evenings. This was supposed to be my last run, the final entry in a logbook filled with a lifetime of miles. It was a simple, straightforward haul from Kansas City to Nashville, a route so familiar I could drive it in my sleep. A final paycheck before I hung up my keys for good. I'd planned to go out peacefully with a thermos of Martha's good strong coffee, my favorite classic country station on the satellite radio, and a quiet sense of satisfaction. The road, however, had other plans for me. After 45 years of service, it wanted a retirement gift. It wanted a piece of me. Part of my well-worn route took me through the rolling, darkened hills of central Missouri and right through the Blackwater Creek Tunnel. Now, I need you to understand, I'm not like these younger drivers who get spooked by every shadow and whisper on the CB. I'm from a generation that believed in busted gaskets and bad wiring, not ghouls and goblins. I'd been through that tunnel at every time of day and every kind of weather, from the brilliant baking sunshine of July to the blinding snows of January. To me, it was just a quarter-mile of concrete and rock, a minor inconvenience that temporarily blocked my radio signal and plunged me into a few seconds of predictable darkness. I'd heard all the tales, the phantom CB calls, the woman in white, the works, and I'd always dismissed them as trucker folklore, campfire stories for the gullible, born from exhaustion and too many hours staring at an empty road. In 45 years, I had never seen a single thing that couldn't be explained by a lack of sleep, too much caffeine, or the way headlights play tricks on you in the deep, lonely dark. That night was different. That night, the road decided to peel back its asphalt skin and show me the raw, impossible truth of what it was. That night, it decided to show me I didn't know a damn thing. As I approached the turnoff for the tunnel road, I felt a strange sense of unease settle over me like a cold, wet blanket. It was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, something a less experienced man might have missed. The air, which had been filled with the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and frogs, the constant comforting soundtrack of the rural dark, went completely, unnaturally silent. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was as if a switch had been flipped. One moment the world was alive with sound, the next it was a vacuum. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that comes right before a tornado touches down, when the world seems to hold its breath. The sky was perfectly clear, a deep velvet canvas studded with 1,000,000 sharp, distant stars. But the darkness around me and the trees and the fields alongside the road felt deeper, more absolute than usual, as if it were a tangible substance that was actively absorbing the light from my headlamps. I told myself it was just nerves. The melancholy of my last trip getting to me, the weight of 45 years, of 1,000,000 miles and 1,000 lonely nights, finally settling on my shoulders. It was easy to get sentimental, to let the imagination run wild when you were closing such a long chapter of your life. I guided my Kenworth W900, my faithful partner for the last decade, onto the county road. The truck felt good, solid. Its engine was a low, powerful thrum that had been the background music to my life for as long as I could remember. The entrance to the tunnel appeared, a perfect black arch cut into the hillside. It looked no different than it ever had. I took a sip of coffee, the familiar bitterness grounding me, and aimed my rig for the center. The familiar transition from open air to enclosed space happened. The sudden roar as the sound of my engine, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat, was thrown back at me, amplified and contained by the concrete walls. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, its green digital numbers glowing softly. 1:15 a.m. I figured I'd be out the other side by 1:16, maybe with a few seconds to spare. Just another 30 seconds in the dark. 1 minute passed. I was still in the tunnel. The curved, stained walls slid by, the overhead lights casting their usual sickly yellow intermittent glow. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I was driving slower than I thought, lost in my own nostalgic thoughts about this being the last time I'd ever pass through here. I nudged the accelerator a bit. 2 minutes passed. The exit, that beautiful, promising square of starry night, was still nowhere in sight. A tight knot of anxiety began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't right. This was fundamentally wrong. I knew this tunnel. I knew its length, its gentle curve to the left, the specific pattern of water stains on the third panel from the entrance. That looked vaguely like a map of Florida. It wasn't this long. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was there a detour inside? Construction? Had I taken a wrong turn into a different, longer tunnel? No, that was impossible. This was the only tunnel for 100 miles. I pressed a little harder on the accelerator, urging the truck forward. The engine whined in response, the speedometer climbing to 50, then 55. But my sense of progress didn't change. The walls just kept coming, an endless repeating pattern of concrete and damp stains. It was like a looping cartoon background, the same cracked panel, the same dark streak of moisture sliding past my window over and over again. 5 minutes passed. Now full-blown panic was setting in, cold and sharp and metallic on my tongue. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. I was driving at 60 miles an hour in a tunnel that should have taken less than a minute to cross. It was impossible. It felt like I was running in place on a cosmic treadmill. The tunnel actively, malevolently stretching itself out before me, a concrete serpent swallowing me whole, inch by agonizing inch. The laws of physics were breaking down around me. That's when the other things started, the truly impossible things. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the cab, a deep frequency that I felt in my teeth and in the bones of my skull. It wasn't the engine. It was something other, something external. A pressure started building in my ears, the kind you feel during a rapid descent in an airplane. A painful, popping pressure that made my head ache and my vision swim at the edges. I looked at the walls, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping second, they seemed to ripple, to flex and distort in my peripheral vision, as if they were made of rubber instead of rock. I blinked hard, shaking my head, sure my tired eyes were deceiving me, a hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. But when I looked again, my blood ran cold. I saw it more clearly this time. It wasn't a trick of the light. The walls were moving. They were pulsing slowly, rhythmically in and out, a sickening organic motion, like the inside of a throat. A sound began then, so low and deep I felt it in the driver's seat and through the steering wheel more than I heard it with my ears. A deep, guttural, wet breathing, seeming to come from the very frame of the truck itself. Inhale. A low rumble and the feeling of being slightly compressed. Exhale. A deep sigh and a feeling of release. A slow, monstrous, sleeping rhythm that matched the pulsing of the walls. The air in the cab, once smelling of old coffee and vinyl, grew thick and foul. It was the smell of a freshly dug grave, of wet soil, of something metallic and coppery like old blood, and an underlying cloying scent of decay that turned my stomach and made me gag. In a fit of pure animal desperation, I grabbed my phone to check my GPS. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger. The map application lit up, showing the little blue dot that represented my truck. But it wasn't on the road. It wasn't on any road. It was sitting in the middle of a vast, blank, unnamed void. No roads, no towns, no geography, just an empty, gray nothingness, as if I had driven off the edge of the world. According to the GPS, my truck was nowhere, and then I saw the detail that shattered the last of my composure. The screen confirmed my worst fear. I wasn't moving at all. My speed was 0 mph. A primal fear, the likes of which I had never known in all my years of close calls and near misses, seized me. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't a ghost. This was something else, something ancient and predatory. The tunnel wasn't a structure. It was a creature, and I was in its belly. I didn't know what else to do. I was a man of simple faith, not given to grand displays of piety, but in that moment, what else was there? I closed my eyes. I squeezed them shut as tight as I could because I couldn't bear to look at the breathing walls or the GPS screen showing my descent into oblivion. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles were white and aching, kept my foot planted on the accelerator, and I prayed. I prayed out loud, my voice a hoarse, terrified whisper in the stinking cab. I prayed to God, to my late mother, to anyone or anything that might be listening, to just let me see my home one more time. I didn't ask for riches or a long life. I just wanted to sit on my porch swing with Martha and feel the sun on my face. I don't know how long I drove like that, blind and terrified, with the sound of that horrible breathing filling my ears and the stench of the grave filling my nostrils. It could have been seconds or an eternity. Time had lost all meaning. But suddenly I was blinded by a burst of brilliant light through my eyelids. A light so intense it was painful. I opened my eyes, flinching, and I was out. I was on the other side, the normal starry sky above me, the normal silent road stretching out before me. The chorus of crickets was back, loud and clear. I slammed on the brakes, a purely reflexive action. The rig protested, the air brakes hissing and the tires screeching as I pulled over so violently that my thermos of coffee flew across the cab and shattered against the passenger door, the hot liquid hissing on the floor mats. I sat there, hyperventilating, sweat pouring down my face, my entire body trembling like a leaf in a storm. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It read 4:17 a.m. Nearly 3 hours had passed. 3 hours to cross a quarter-mile of tunnel. I looked at my trip meter. It had registered only 0.3 miles. My mind couldn't reconcile the numbers. It was impossible. It was a violation of every law of physics and reason I knew. 3 hours of my life gone, eaten, I eventually got the truck moving again, driving in a complete daze, the rest of the trip to Nashville a total blur. I delivered my load, filled out my final paperwork with a shaking hand that made my signature look like a child's scrawl, and went home. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not Martha, not my kids. How could I? They would have thought I'd lost my mind, that the road had finally broken me on my very last trip. They would have looked at me with pity. A week later, I got a call from the mechanic I'd sold my rig to. He was a good kid, thorough, knew his stuff. He was giving it a full inspection before putting it up for sale. "Henry," he said, his voice filled with a genuine professional puzzlement. "I've never seen anything like this. The undercarriage of your truck, it's torn to shreds. I'm not talking about a few scrapes. There are these deep, long gouges in the metal running from front to back, right down the center. It looks like something huge and heavy was dragged underneath it for miles. What in the world did you drive over?" I didn't say anything. I just stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear, looking out the window at my grandkids playing in the yard, so full of life and oblivious to the dark things that slumber in the world. I knew what had made those marks. It wasn't something I drove over, it was the road itself. It was the tunnel. It was the thing that lives in the dark places of the world, and for 3 terrifying hours, it had held me in its teeth. I may have finished my last run, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that a part of me never really left that tunnel. It's still in there, driving through an endless, breathing darkness, a ghost in a machine that never, ever reaches the light. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know in the comments. Which part chilled you the most? And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for more terrifying stories.